Hello, everybody. Boy, do we have a special treat for you with an early edition of Cues with the Beauties. Fred, Alexis, are you ready to see my talents on the keyboard?
Probably
No.
not.
Yeah, no, the world's not ready for it, but I'm bringing it to you anyway because we need to hype ourselves up heading into Game 4, heading into Cues with the Beauties. So without further ado, here's my rendition of My Heart Will Go On with the Cues with the Beauties.
So excited for this.
Every week we ask you, we beg you to send us your dying questions. Here we are. That's all I know. I don't know
did not
anymore.
think there was going to be singing that went along with that.
You threw me off there.
I threw myself
She gave
off.
us a brief run through of the audio I did of the piano. I had no idea it was going to be accompanying singing to that.
I'm running on 4 hours of sleep. I may have gone a little crazy. But
Honestly,
awesome.
that was pretty good. That was
Can
pretty good.
we can make that happen every year or every single
Yeah.
week. No,
I will come up with a new song.
Jesse,
I know
best Jesse.
I know small parts of very many songs on the keyboard, so I can reiterate.
We
those.
just need like 10 seconds of songs. You know, you don't got to get the whole thing down.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's an intro. But we got some good questions coming in. And as we mentioned, we're going to release it a little bit earlier, which I think we like. Very timely questions as the Wild are in the midst of the playoffs, down 2-1 to the Vegas Golden Knights. Without further ado, Fred, let's go.
Okay, this is from Pat M, who I'm sure you guys can guess.
No,
who
Pat, the Wild are not
Pat
going to
is.
sweep the series.
Mickeletti, how many players from the taxi squad get called upon to play tomorrow night? 4 or 5?
Pat's just our troll. He's just trolling us. I mean, obviously, they're not going to make huge dramatic line changes. We'll get more to that in a second. But, Pat, you know it's not going to be anybody from the taxi squad except maybe one person.
As much as I think that Dean needs to start making some changes here, I was giving him I was being lenient with him after game 2. I'm like, all right, they played a really good game, just didn't get the win. Let's see how game 3 goes. Game 3, literally, I have no words for what happened in that game. Dean needs to make some changes, but it's not gonna, we all know what the possible change might be. And if it's not what we all think it's going to be, I think Dean is making a mistake.
Let's move on.
Let's just move on. Coach C, also Trent N and Fab 5 with very similar questions. Sounds like Johansson is out for a while. Who would you dress and how would you set up the lines? Also, the power play seems very out of sync recently. Am I the only one feeling this way?
I mean, I'll start with an update on Marcus Johansson. We just got off a call with Dean Ebsen. He broke his arm, just straight up broke it.
Snap.
Which you could kind of tell that was what would have been, hope was maybe the wrist, something a little less severe.
Mm-hmm.
But Johansson out indefinitely, obviously with a broken arm. Unfortunate for him. Naturally, the next guy up has to be Zach Parise.
Yeah.
You would think. Dean, we tried to ask him like 5 different ways, and he didn't answer.
Didn't
But
bite.
I mean, he's the one guy down there that you know what you're going to get from him. I mean, no slight to Kyle Rowd. I know everyone's probably clamoring for Matt Boldy, but I would bet Zach Parise's next in line. I'd be very surprised, in fact, if it wasn't Zach.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's kind of what I was alluding to in response to that first question is Zach should get the nod here. And not against any of the taxi squad guys, those younger guys who've stepped up in certain parts throughout the season. But we've talked about this before. Zach Parise has the playoff experience. Zach Parise is a net front guy where the Wild have needed to get more opportunities because they've gotten the first shots. They've gotten the shots from the point, the shots from the boards. Now they need to start putting pucks home in that net front area where Marc-Andre Fleury struggles so much. And I just think that putting him into this lineup with this Minnesota Wild roster, you are going to see changes. Now, what do they do if they put him in the lineup? I think you bump Nico Sturm up and put Zach Parise on that fourth line. That would be probably what I would want to do, or Bukestad, or bump Bukestad up. One of those guys. There needs to be some kind of shuffling with one of those two, and then Zach Parise on that line. So that's kind of what I would say. I've really been impressed. I mean, the fourth line has played really well for the Minnesota Wild in this series. I thought that they've, the fourth line has a certain role in hockey, and I thought that for what you expect a fourth line to do, that fourth line has done a good job so far in this series. So I'm a little hesitant about shaking it up because I think they've done a good job, but I think they've also earned the right to maybe have one or two of those players further up in the lineup and then put Zach Parise on that fourth line and see what happens. But something needs to be shaken up a little bit here, more than just a mild line roll in the middle of the game, because obviously it hasn't been working.
And because we're always dissecting everything that Dean says, he did kind of allude to maybe there might be more changes coming. I mean, maybe he does swap in one other player. Maybe they do want to see Boldy. So it'd be very interesting. I think if you don't put Zach in, it's going to make for a very awkward, very difficult
yeah.
situation between the organization. I mean, that rift, which again, I'm hesitant to call it a rift because we don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but I think if you select a Matt Boldy before you put a Zach Parise in,
That's a hell of a statement.
That's a statement, right? And that's a big divide heading into the offseason. So what do we got next, Frederic?
Well, I do want to say, though, that I feel bad that he broke his arm, but Johansson hasn't done anything in the playoffs.
I mean,
he hasn't contributed at all, and he looks extremely sloppy. So it's like I would have sat him even if he didn't break his arm.
I think that was very heavy in my mentions last night. Like, I didn't wish ill on the guy, but I did want him out of the lineup, which, again, Dean still liked the way he was playing because I think it was a little bit of a surprise that they didn't make a change, especially after game 2 where he looked really bad. One of those turnovers, in fact, effectively caused a Vegas goal. But there have been a couple guys that I think that have made glaring mistakes as well that you probably aren't going to swap out either. So we'll see what happens.
And the only thing I'd say is that Rask needs to be back with Kaprizov. I said that.
All right, Fred, don't just next question.
Fine. This one comes from Jared M. Which Wild team does this year's iteration remind you of the most? 2003, 2013, 2014? Another one?
2016.
Another one.
Another one. Yeah. I say, and I've said this from the beginning because that 2016 team was so strong and they were coming off like a franchise high of points and they were just phenomenal. And then they ran into Jake Allen and a hot goaltender, which is kind of what's happening against Vegas right now. I mean, Vegas has many more pieces, but Marc-Andre Fleury obviously stymieing the Wild. So I compare it to that because this team does look like a team that should make a run or should go past the first round, but they're struggling just like they did in 2016. So that's my biggest comparison.
I have two kind of answers. Part A is for sure not 2003, because I think with that team, it was so unexpected what the Wild did. Like they were relatively new to the league still. A lot of the pieces that they had were still early on in their career. So even guys who turned out to be really good hockey players in the NHL were pretty early on in their careers. We didn't know what to expect from them yet. So for sure, not that team. As much fun as that team was to watch in the playoffs and see what they did, I'm going to say none. I'm going to say this Minnesota Wild team is a completely different team that we've seen entering the playoffs and in the playoffs than any other season. And I really just attribute it to the fact that despite the Wild having some good regular seasons and coming into the playoffs hot or having some good playoff series or winning playoff series, they've never had that star player, which Kaprizov is. Now, Kaprizov hasn't contributed in the playoffs like we hoped that he would have so far. There's still at least a few games left in this series, and if the Wild get out of this series, there's going to be more time for him to shine. But they've never had that possibility of that superstar shining in the playoffs because they never really had that superstar. So I will say that this team, to me, has a completely different vibe. And even going into the playoffs, I just felt differently entering the playoffs than I've ever felt watching a Minnesota Wild team before. And not saying that I thought they were going to, they're not going to go win the Stanley Cup or anything, but I just have an overall different vibe of this team than I've ever had. So my answer would be none.
But would you say like last night's loss was because of Flower? No. I don't think it was.
No.
Last night was just absolute meltdown of execution.
It was a combination of not being able to recover from adversity and horseshit officiating, and it was about 50-50. But it is disappointing because it's like they played so well in that first period, and it's disheartening that a disallowed goal, albeit there was a penalty committed that caused the offsides, yada yada yada, whatever you want to say, it's disheartening that they couldn't recover from that after playing so strongly in that first period. So that was the first game of the series, Fred, where I wouldn't say Flower won them that game. It was just
not at all.
The Wild just did not. Yeah,
Flower was human last night. I mean, he made a couple really good saves, but you're generating 14 shots on net. You're not going to get it there. And again, absolutely right. It was just the complete 40 minutes of meltdown, and then the frustration seeped through, and then you're drawing penalties. I mean, luckily the penalty kill was on point, but you can't have that frustration. And I think that was a large part. And then losing Marcus Johansson and going down and having to move the lines around too. I mean, like Alexa said, adversity, just they couldn't figure that one out and they got down on themselves. So hopefully they can shake this off. They had no practice today, and hopefully a reset button is hit very hard for tomorrow.
Smash that reset button.
Yeah.
All right, next question. 100 watt. Do you think not having a 12th forward and line juggling caused the massive change in momentum in game 3?
Ironically, I think we just said that. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we just kind of covered that, but it's exactly it. I think that was part of the adversity that they faced, and then having to figure out who's going to play with who. And it just seemed like they were kind of running around with their heads cut off a little bit more than they should have. They didn't look very composed, and they just kind of, they beat themselves, frankly. You know, they let themselves get in their way. So that was a huge, and then the goals that Vegas scored, they just kind of kept piling them up, and that the momentum went completely Vegas's way for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter what kind of role a player plays on a team. When there is an injury in a game, especially in the playoffs, that is really going to take a hit for that team. And you just have to find a way to get through that. I mean, think about even against the Habs and the Maple Leafs, John Tavares going down. I mean, players were literally in tears watching what happened, and the Maple Leafs ended up losing that game. So I'm not saying that it happened because of that, but it really is hard for these players. I mean, these are this team, each team is a family, right? Like, these are the guys you're around all the time. And when you see an injury happen, it can be hard to compose yourself and move on with the game. And that, combined with the called off goal and just a lot of other things that happened throughout the game, the Wild were not able to bounce back. But I do think that the injury and the ultimate line juggling that came of it really caused a lot of chaos for the Wild during that game last night.
And Marcus Johansson has been hurt numerous times this season, so you got to feel for that guy. It's something new every time.
Yeah.
Next up, Kaprizov Kountdown. Are these times as hard on you as it is on me with 3 youngins? What do we have to do to win this series after seemingly playing our best game and losing, aka Game 2?
Well, he's not asking me that question, Justin. He's asking you that.
I mean, are you tired, Alexis? What time did you get up this night?
Oh, no, I went to bed at 12:30. I was up at 8. So what, twice as many hours of sleep as you got, Justin?
Yeah, that's fine. No, I feel like at some point in time, you learn to run on no sleep, right? Like, I'm fine, especially don't drink a whole lot of caffeine these days. It's cool. No, and then onto the game part, the actual part, not my boring life part. I mean, Game 2 probably was their best game outside of the first period yesterday. The first period was so freaking good. Like, I still can't get over how they lost that. I mean, I remember texting with my mom during the game. She's like, there's no way they lose this. I'm like, God, no, there's no way. Like, it just looked unreasonable for them to have stopped. So, coming off of Game 2 and losing that, I think was disappointing. But again, you're leaving Vegas with a split, and that's huge, right? We had talked about that before. So, I guess there's still a possibility to win. I think they're still going to go toe to toe with Vegas on Saturday and see what happens then.
I think the most disappointing thing is that I think a lot of people expected Vegas to win that second game. You know, we know these two teams play each other tightly. It's really hard to sweep those first 2 games on the road in the playoffs. So I think going into that game, a lot of people were like, if the Wild win, awesome. Like that would be perfect. But a lot of people expected Vegas to come away victorious there. And it ended up being a really close game that the Wild just couldn't get on the winning side of. I think Game 3.
And that was a hot goaltender. That was a hot goaltender. Win.
Yes, exactly. A lot of opportunities they just couldn't capitalize on. Game 3 to me has been the most disappointing because you come out strong in that first period, like is expected of you on home ice after losing a tough one in Game 2, where you had the opportunities, you had the momentum, and just couldn't get the win, and having just a complete collapse mentally and everything that happened in that game was so disappointing to watch. I mean, that was one of the toughest playoff games I can remember watching in recent years, where I was just beside myself watching them play because I just could not figure out why they were doing what they were doing after seeing
or not doing what they should be doing, right? For lack of better.
Yeah. So to me, Game 3 is the most disappointing, and this is going to be the deciding factor. And can you bounce back from the Game 3? And we'll see what they can do in Game 4, because if they go down 3-1, it's going to be tough to come back.
I was just going to say, concluding on that, you can't go back to Vegas down 3-1. It's just that's not a good look. So here's hoping.
It's not a good look, but it's a familiar look. Next question from Dan B. Other than the center depth, what is the biggest need for the Wild to address this offseason?
I mean, Alexis, do you want to go for? I think that's a great question. I don't know. I guess
I have an answer that I don't know if this is kind of the answer that you were looking for, Dan, but I would say figuring out these contracts that need to get signed, these players that are going to be unrestricted free agents, figuring out the money behind that, and can you get these important pieces to this Minnesota Wild roster solidified on this team? Pieces that have proven to be big reasons why the Wild have had success in this offseason. You got the goaltending, I think, for the most part figured out. A little worried about Kakkonen at this point. We've talked about that last week, but I think that Talbot has proven to be the starter that Dean told us we could rely on and Bill told us we could rely on. I think you've realized that Kaprizov is this star player that we expect him to be. You got that kind of out of the way. I think getting these pieces solidified, like Jules Eriksson, even someone like Ian Cole that we've talked about, these pieces that are going to be important for the near future of the Minnesota Wild. To me, that's one of the biggest things that I want to see addressed in the offseason, and making sure that those contracts are signed within a reasonable amount of time so we know what this roster is going to look like heading into next season.
I mean, adding on to that, then I guess you got to figure out which pieces you're going to lose to Seattle and what you're going to replace. If you're going to lose a Jordan Greenway, who do you need to bring in to play with Jules Eriksson and Marcus Foligno? Or if you're going to lose a Matt Dumba, who do you bring in? I mean, I think those are some really big questions too, because that'll help you decide what you need. Do you need to get a little bit more help on defense? I mean, is Callan Addison ready? It's kind of also establishing who down low is ready to make that step, and you're ready to make that commitment. Again, we know Marco Rossi, Matt Boldy, Callan Addison, obviously the big ones talked about, but are they officially ready to become a part of your roster, or do you need to go out and look at some free agents? So yeah, I think that's another big question, just figuring out where you're at with some of those younger guys too.
Next up, Adam C., our buddy Adam C. We always knew there was a Parise cult, but what do you think of the Rask cult that spawned recently?
We got attacked for our Rask hate last week, which is probably fair. I mean, everybody in the media is pretty hard on Rask, and I know Bill Guerin kind of called all the media members out with Michael Russo last week, saying he's a hell of a player. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more in lighthearted fun, just because you don't expect him to do much. I mean, he looked very promising before he came here, and then got hurt, and he didn't do much right away. But granted, that's a part of the system, and him not fitting into the system right away. So I'm sure there's a little Rask cult. I don't know if it's a hate cult or a love cult, but there's definitely people out there who love to talk about him.
I will say that Minnesota sports fan / media cynicism also plays a role in it. So I think when you see a player perform disappointingly consistently, you're just kind of like, you just want to lay into that, because you're just like, wow, this is what we expected. Also, I know I hyperbolize stuff to try to be funny. So once I find something to like make fun of, I'm like, I'm literally just going to run this joke into the ground. And so I think that that's part of it too, where that's just kind of, it's an easy joke to make. But yeah, he's in the National Hockey League for a reason, right? Obviously he is better than majority of hockey players in this world because he plays in the National Hockey League. So yes, he is a talented player, but when you look at the Minnesota Wild roster, like literally eye test and statistically speaking, he is one of the worst players on the Minnesota Wild roster for what he's expected to do.
But statistically speaking, he's not. He's doing exactly what he needs to be doing. Like, he's actually
this year, I suppose. Yes. I'll give him credit. This year he has played a lot better.
He's a lot like Zach Parise, right? When he's great, you love to love him, and then when he's not, you love to tear him to shreds more than any other player. So bummer for him, I guess. I mean, not to be facetious, but most of it's in good snark, and you know, obviously you want to see him do well.
Go Victor Rask. Score some goals, please.
Put him with Kaprizov. Next, last question from Joe B. After Johansson went down with the injury, it appeared that Evason had issues figuring out how to absorb that loss. Was the instance of keeping the line static the whole season now rearing its head at the worst time because chemistry was lacking?
I will say that, like, I mean, Dean is still in his first full season as a head coach. Like, he's still figuring this stuff out. Like, yes, has he had a really good season with the Minnesota Wild? Has he done better than I think a lot of people expected? I mean, we didn't even know what we didn't know, right? Like, Dean has never been in this role before, so we didn't really know what to expect. So I think that in a certain sense, there's this side of me that wants to cut him some slack of, like, he's still figuring this out. Like, this is, you know, he might not know exactly what to do yet. And at the same time, I'm like, well, you know, trial by fire. You need to just get in there and you need to make these decisions and you need to find ways to win, because that's what the best coaches and the best teams end up doing. So I do think that there was some panic there. And I think that it wasn't just Dean. It wasn't just the players. It was everybody. I think there was just overall panic and chaos when that happened, and they never fully recovered from it. And like I said, I really think what Dean does moving forward the rest of this series is really going to dictate how I feel about him as a head coach, because both Jesse and I have said that we did not give him enough credit at the beginning of the season. He has really impressed us. Now, prove us right here that you know what you're doing and make the right decisions for the remainder of this playoff series.
Exactly. And, I don't know that it was a lack of chemistry. I think that might be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
And I know it frustrates people, Joe. I know it frustrates you that Dean keeps his lines so intact. But at the same time, Dean has stressed over and over to us again, you can play with anybody in a wild jersey. I mean, he uses that cliche constantly. So I don't know that he was ever nervous about finding the chemistry. And we've seen him do some shuffling in game before. So it's not like it was completely unheard of. So I don't know that it necessarily came back to bite him by any means. I think in general, the team just became flustered from top to finish again. I don't know necessarily it was directly impacted by Johansson's injury, but it was just in general. So I think that frustration and kind of that chaos that you maybe saw wasn't necessarily because the guys weren't comfortable playing with one another. It was just the way they were playing in general as a team.
I think Dean has a lot of faith in this Minnesota Wild roster. To one step further of him saying you can play with anybody, he's like basically said there are no lines, like, right? You're just going to roll them. Everybody's doing everything. Your role is the same as the person behind you and in front of you and beside you. And he's made that very clear all season. So maybe it was just this blind faith that this time it didn't work out, that the guys weren't able to produce the way that Dean was expecting of them. To Jesse's point, I don't think it was a lack of chemistry. I think there was just a lot of chaotic things happening yesterday that the Wild were not able to find a way to recover from. It was a lack of mental strength to get through that game, in my opinion.
Right. That's it, huh?
Is that it?
That's it.
Wow.
Should I have my
Congratulations.
Come on, take us home, Jesse.
Thank you very much for your questions this week. We really appreciate you.
And by the way, we're looking for any ad sponsors, lessons. We will gladly trade some ad time for us.
I used to play the trumpet. I taught myself how to play the piano, by the way.
I played the saxophone.
I wanted to play the saxophone so bad, but I couldn't make a sound on the reed.
We should do the Bardown Beauties band trio.
Yeah, Fred.
I still want to bring Hudson in as like a band member. I think he could really make some noise.
He's been so into songs. He makes up songs constantly. I'm like,
Hudson's only purpose is to choke slam people. So
his own brother specifically.
Very true. Just psycho. Should watch that. All right. Thanks again for everybody that participated. Always have a lot of fun. We expect a ton of questions to come in as the Minnesota Wild hopefully continue this. Be sure to stay tuned to our social media channels. Another playoff game coming to St. Paul tomorrow. Have a good day, guys.